We're at about 12:01. So I was just going to start with a land acknowledgement. That's a very important practice that we have at the school. So even though this webinar is offered virtually, and we're welcoming participants from all over Canada and the world, it's still important to recognize that our school has a physical location. And we'd like to acknowledge the sacred land on which the Adler Graduate School operates. So this has been a site of human activity of Indigenous people for over 15,000 years. The land on which our school building sits is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. So today, the meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're so grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community and on this territory. So thank you, everybody. So some technical notes. If your internet is cutting out at all, the registration email will also have an option to call in. So you won't be able to see us, but you'll at least be able to hear us if you're having some internet connectivity issues. And there's going to be a question and answer period after Linda does her session. So please hold any questions you have for Linda until after her presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a wonderful chat function. So that is for attendees to communicate with each other. So if you have any comments, resources, feel free to share those there. We just ask that everybody keep those constructive and professional. And you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. I've started noticing some introductions. That's incredible. Let us know where you're calling in from, something about yourself. And I just want to go into an introduction. We're so excited to be rebooting the Many Hearts series as a webinar. The Many Hearts of Psychotherapy started many years ago as a co-sponsored initiative between Adler Graduate Professional School in Toronto and the Alliance of Psychotherapy Training Institutions in Ontario. So the Many Hearts used to be hosted in person at the Adler School, and they were an opportunity for psychotherapists to share the heart of their practice with other psychotherapists, to share their modalities and their wisdom with each other. So for this rebooted series, we're going to expand that concept, and we're opening up the sessions to all mental health professionals, which includes psychologists, professional coaches, social workers, counselors, and psychotherapists. And to accommodate physical distancing during the pandemic, we're meeting over Zoom webinar. So one of my favorite things about Adler is our fantastic community, all of you, and I'm so grateful to be able to create this space where we can come together and connect and learn something new. So for our first webinar, we're welcoming Linda Page. She is the president of the Alliance of Psychotherapy Training Institutes and the founder and president emerita of Adler Graduate Professional School. She is an educational innovator, business leader, coach, counselor, and author. She's been a part of Adlerian graduate professional education in Ontario since 1978. In 2004, she founded Adler Graduate Professional School and has served as president until a few years ago. She was a psychotherapist in private practice until 1995 and became a coach in 2002. And she co-authored the book, Coaching with the Brain in Mind. So many of you know Linda. She has a very unique perspective coming from a variety of different practices, which is why we wanted to have her here to kick off the Many Hearts and welcome all of you. And today she will be answering the question, why Adler? So welcome, Linda.
Thank you very much, Camille. It's a great pleasure to be here and have a chance to talk with people from many different areas in our constituencies in the Adler community. One thing, every time we do the land acknowledgement, I think of that Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt agreement and thinking the image of people where in order to enjoy the bounties of whatever life brings us, the lesson is that we have to share it. And so that's a lesson that the our indigenous elders have passed on, and would that we would only learn it. So that's something that we are working on at Adler, certainly. I wanted to start off by, first, I really want to say thank you to Roja Vivekanand, who many of you know her. She carried the administrative, I wouldn't say a burden, the administrative opportunity of hosting the Many Hearts for Psychotherapy, and did a fabulous job. And thank you to Camille for taking that over as we expanded. The Many Hearts of Psychotherapy is still something that will continue, co-sponsored by APTI. And however, we have realized that if you look at the heart of Adler, and in fact, the heart of psychotherapy, and in fact, the heart of all the different kinds of programs that we teach at Adler, coaching, and just mental health in general, we realize at the very deepest level, there is the recognition that things are always changing. Sometimes they change in ways that makes us very, very happy, and sometimes it doesn't. So let me just share my screen as I take you through this discussion. Okay, hi everybody, hope you can see that. I hope you recognize it. For those of you who are not in Toronto, this is a picture of the Toronto Harbourfront with the CN Tower there, towering over everything. So the question is, if we're talking about the Many Hearts of Adler, what is at the heart of all of Adler's programs and all of the programs that we will be presenting in the Many Hearts series? Of course, at the very deepest level, as I said, it is that things change all the time. We can't prevent it. And so then the question becomes, how do we have not just any change, how do we make it more likely that changes will go in the direction we want? And of course, and the direction we hope for. That means conscious change, conscious activities to change. And so we invite you to join us in our Adler mission, which introduces the idea of changing. Basically, we practice what we teach. This is our mission statement. And by the way, this mission statement isn't something that just sits on a shelf or is in a picture on the wall or anything like that. We literally, for those of you who are engaged with that or at all, you know that whenever we make a decision, we look back at this mission and ask ourselves, does this match our mission? Our mission states we practice what we teach in order to transform ourselves, our organizations, and the world. I don't know if you can see here, I love this photograph because there's in the iris of this person, there is a world map. So the question then becomes, how does, if change is at the base of all of Adler's programs, then, and you practice what you teach, then what do you teach and how does that relate to change? So let me talk about that. So I think the most important concept that comes from Alfred Adler's teaching, he lived a century ago from 1870 to 1837. Many of you know that he was part of the group that started psychoanalysis. And then he went on, he was always open to new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. So during his lifetime, his theories changed. And in fact, he came up with a concept that he called, well, not in English, and he called it German, a concept, Gemeinschaftsgefühl, which is translated, one translation in English is social interest. And so he came up with that concept after he had served as a doctor in the First World War, treating people coming back from, treating the soldiers coming back from battle. And I'm sure those of you who've studied trauma at all know that the concept during the First World War of shell shock has actually evolved so that now we see that as PTSD. So that he didn't write a lot about his experience in the war, but we know from what happened afterwards that it had an effect on him, because he came back from that experience with this concept of social interest. A century-old concept. You wonder, why is that useful now? Well, I think you'll see. For Adler, social interest was a measure of mental health. So basically, he saw that people who had the kind of resilience that we now recognize as a strength those people had a certain way of looking at the world. And basically, it was that our social connections support our good health. And systems theory, other science research in general nowadays supports this. And in fact, as you know, both in coaching and in our psychology program, we talk about the social dimensions of health in general, not just mental health. So, social interest, let's talk about it. As I say, I think it is the most, and probably the most important concept that Adler came up with. And he saw it in three ways. He described it as being, or as marked by being able to see with the eyes of the other, hear with the ears of the other. And there's more to that, but let's stop there and look at what I said before, is that we're talking about good connections. And we recognize seeing with the eyes of another as empathy, as connecting with others, making those connections with others. But current research recognizes that there's two aspects to empathy. Cognitive empathy is the perception, the ability to repeat or understand on a cognitive level another person's feelings. And however, we know that understanding another person's feelings doesn't necessarily mean that you identify with those feelings or feel those feelings yourself. And so, for instance, we make jokes about how people whose primary interest lies in how much money they make would be able to use cognitive empathy. But I think you would agree there is something missing from someone who says, "Oh, I believe empathy would be useful, so let's hire somebody who can do that or explain that to us." In fact, we know that it's possible to see and hear other people's feelings without actually engaging in the feeling. And Sam Vaknin has a book. He declares himself to be a sociopath, and he says that he knows how to put up a good face, but sometimes that mask slips and the real feelings underneath slip through. Well, how can we have real feelings underneath that are true empathy? So the second part of social interest for Adler was not only to see with the eyes and hear with the ears, but to feel with the heart of the other as a crucial part to empathy. and a crucial part ultimately of social interest. So let's look at what emotion means. Why is that? Why do you need that to actually have full-on empathy? Well, emotions are defined as neural impulses that move an organism to action. That is to say, in our experience, it's our feelings that make us want to act, either to avoid something or to move towards it. So full-on empathy and social interest mean the ability to share emotions, to feel, at least to some extent. We can never fully know another person's experience, of course, but we can have a sense of what it's like to feel the way they feel, to actually feel that ourselves. And we can behave in a way that shows compassion. That's based on empathy, lending a helping hand. And the research on altruism shows that when we do feel empathy, not just have a concept about it, we are more likely to engage in altruism, that is, acting on behalf of one another. But is that enough? We can ask, is just empathy for another and altruism for another and social interest for another, one other person, is that enough in today's world? Well, that's a very good question, and one that we at Adler are grappling with as we work very hard to expand our programs to include the perspectives of basically all the things that are going on in the world today. And underneath it all is, you look at the world today, and if we keep doing what we've been doing, we're not even sure this species will survive. So Adler did insist on a third aspect of social interest, not just the feeling for another, or a small group of people, but he said the third aspect was identification with all humanity, and in fact, some sense of identification with the whole universe. And he used the term subspecie eternitatis, a term that's used historically in philosophy. But it means from an eternal, universal, totally widespread perspective, not just a narrow or temporary one. And that means to me, when I hear that I would like for us to have social interest, depending on which requires empathy, in such a way that when artifacts from Earth are discovered 1 billion years into the future by some other species, and they look at this postcard from us here on Earth, and we say, oh, we were here, and they say, that's an example of a good way to live. That's what we're hoping for. So you'll see, just to understand about Adler, we chose as our crest a motto that relates to what Adler's motto was for social interest. His was subspecie eternitatis, and we thought, okay, I think we've got a big enough job for this lifetime if we learn to identify ourselves with all of humankind around the world, recognizing as humanistic philosophy does, that the human species is totally dependent on the environment that we live in, on this earth that we live in. And in fact, Buddhism talks about our body and our environment having a relationship of a thing and its shadow. So in a sense, our environment is our shadow. And it's also true that to a certain extent, we are the shadow of our environment. So in other words, we're intimately interconnected, and how we treat the environment is how we will end up being treated by the environment. And that, if you take that concept of social interest back to the interpersonal, social interest means having an interest in the interests of others, taking on the win-win perspective, having the kind of hope that says we can all benefit. When we all benefit more. So that's the concept that I think is very, very much at the heart of Adlerian philosophy, and the one that we worked very hard to figure out how to put into action. So we call this perceiving our earthly home in a new way, one that encompasses all of humanity and environment, and we call this systems thinking. And that's very influential. We see systems nowadays much more than we ever did before. Nowadays, I'll say something like, "What is a system?" and everybody has a comment to make. We know we're connected. Oh, by the way, do you know what this is? Does anybody know what that is? You can, I guess you can't answer me, can you? This is a picture of the internet. And this was before COVID. I bet you it would be so full now you wouldn't see any empty space in it at all. So we are connected now as never before. And in fact, those connections show us that if you can do an electron microscope picture of a brain cell, it looks so much like a picture of the universe. So patterns in this world repeat themselves. So when we engage in social interest with this other person or this group of people we're connected with, in fact, that does have reverberations way beyond that particular relationship. So our understanding of systems theory is not enough. What we're hoping for is to go beyond just perceiving our interconnectedness, but acting like everything's okay, let's not do anything. But instead of that, we need to, oh, look, a little mistake here, whoops. Not just knowing about, but feeling the system that connects us, identifying ourselves with the whole. Can we develop feelings for something other than another person? Can we develop feelings for the whole system of life on Earth, even for all life in the universe? These emotions are the ones that lead us to act from the perspective of all of eternity and the universe. And for, as I said, for Alfred Adler, social interest meant feeling an interest in the interests of others. So what we are intending, working at quite persistently at Adler, is to practice what we teach, which is social interest. And in fact, that's how we are planning to advance the Adler mission, to take change and add hope to it, and add our commitment to it and our understanding to it, so that that change becomes conscious and transformative. And you in the coaching program know that we typically say when a coach says, "Oh, what do I do? What do I do?" And our Dean Emerita of coaching, Adria Trohill, I remember when I took her course, said, "Linda, be a coach." And that being, that's what we're talking about. Recognizing that our being is tied up in the being of others. And therefore, when we take an interest in something that benefits us all, then we are indeed advancing the mission of the school, and of course, I believe, of all of humanity. So, in order to, where our mission says we are engaging social interest, we're following Adler's philosophy in order to transform ourselves, our organizations, and the world. Now, this identifying ourselves or recognizing that we're healthier and the world is healthier when we operate on the basis of win-win. That takes courage. It's a big, important, noble task, but it does require something, social interest, and that is courage. Why? Because, taking as an example, Adler, his theory changed over the years and has continued to change and grow and develop. And we take him as a mentor, not not somebody who tells us what to do or anything, but he mentors us still in terms of being open to new ways of seeing the world and being open to understanding another's perspective and to recognizing that we share humanity with these other people. And so, however, doing that means being open. Means being vulnerable. And often we're afraid to do that because we don't know if we'll be judged, we don't know if we'll be censured, all those things. Or get a bad grade. So how do we have that courage to be open, to do what we talked about recently in the psychotherapy course I teach, which is Richard Kopp said, what is the most important thing that a therapist should do? And I know coaches will agree with this. What is the most important thing that a therapist should do when you don't know what to do? And Richard Kopp said, be curious. And this curiosity, not judgmental, but simply, how fascinating. That curiosity is something that's, I think, is at, again, the heart of all of the helping professions. So, and remember, courage, is the heart in French, and in other languages, some quite related. So courage means taking heart. How do we do that? I have recently, I'm going to stop sharing now. I have recently come to recognize that I don't think or talk as quickly as I used to. And I could see that as a real downer. But in fact, what it's allowed me to do is be much more appreciative of poetry and the other arts. And even books like just reading Braiding Sweetgrass, which I highly recommend to you. But those, being able to take the moment and expand it and really get into it. So I've written poetry, now and then all my life, but recently I've been quite taken up by it. And so I wrote a poem about courage that I thought I would share with you today. Courage, rooted in our common soil, we each grow on our own. When the hard rain buffets us, we fear we'll die alone. Courage is what ripens us and fills us till we burst with a sweet amrita that satisfies all thirst. We scatter all our pulp and seeds when we fall back to earth. Our pulp to nourish other lives, our seeds for our rebirth. I used the word Amrita in that poem. That word means, it's similar to ambrosia from Western classical literature. In India, it had the meaning of the drink of the gods. In China, Amrita was the rain that comes down when the whole realm is peaceful. So I really like that concept of Amrita, and I use that in the poem. Okay, so there were a couple of other things I wanted to talk about. You know, looking at the heart of Adler, we come up with courage. I did want to mention that Adler, you notice that when we write Adler, often we put it all in caps, like the caps above my head here. And we do that because we want to differentiate Adler, the school, from Alfred Adler, the person who provided us with philosophy that is the basis for our values as a school. And I want to make it clear for those of you who aren't familiar with us already, that having Adler in the name does not mean that we only teach Adlerian psychology, or that's not it at all. That would have been very un-Adlerian. We are interested in promoting all the modalities that help people heal and develop the self-confidence and courage they need to have productive, happy lives. So that commitment, the commitment to our values, the fact that we are not a publicly supported university, we tried to get the universities to come up with the kind of program that we deliver, but they're much more deeply embedded in an academic environment that to a great extent puts research and academic writing and publishing first. Whereas in our program, the students that we tend to draw are the ones, and again, both coaching, all the programs, the students that we tend to draw are the ones who are interested mainly in doing what the theories and research says needs to be done in order to help people have happier, more fulfilling lives. Excuse me just a second. So we're unique. Our Master of Psychology program is actually the only one in the world. It takes advantage of a particular uniqueness of psychology in Ontario. In Ontario, you may become registered with the College of Psychologists as a psychological associate, but fully able to practice as a psychologist at the master's level. Now, we did not have that. For a number of years, when I went through the program, the psychology program, Master of Arts and Counseling Psychology, that came from Chicago, started in Toronto in 1978. And those of us here began helping to administer it. And we did that until 2006. And when the College of Psychologists began to allow master's level people to be registered, we said to Chicago, well, we need a degree that matches the requirements for registration. And the university said, just kind of ignored us. And so we decided, well, when Chicago said they were not going to provide such a degree for us, they said, you guys do it yourself. So we started working in 2004 on a degree program, a master's degree program. And that continued for a number of years. Some of you don't know that we actually were consulted by the people who were forming the post-secondary education degree procedures, because they said, well, you're a private institution. We want to include private institutions. What do we need to do? So we made some suggestions to them. And we've had a wonderful relationship with the Ministry of Colleges and Universities and with their arm's length quality assurance body also. So we started developing the program, and I can remember on October 7th, I think it was the 7th, 2017, this was in the days before we could do, before there was the kind of internet access that we have today, before there was the kind of internet connectivity on our smartphones. And so what the ministry required was they wanted 4 copies, and we wanted a couple of copies for themselves. We had to write and hand in, and hand in 4 copies of 3 different applications, each of which was, 300 or 400 pages, and one of them was like 800 pages. So on the night of October 6th, several of us, this was the weekend before the Thanksgiving holiday, we'd been working and working and working, putting things into the copying machine, using 3-hole punch paper, punching things, putting them in huge notebooks that would hold that many pages, and stacking them all up. It got to be late in the evening, and I was supposed to go on holidays the next day. And my lovely staff, Patricia Maxwell, and actually Roger Hollander, one of our shareholders, was there, and Norma was there. And we packed, we got everything done, but there was no way, of course, at that late time that we could get it to the, it's called PCAT, Post-Secondary Education Quality Assessment Board. Those are the people that we have to hand in these, 3 times 4, 12 huge notebooks to. So Patricia Maxwell, who was our administrator at the time, said, I'll do it, Linda, you go off on holiday. And so I went away fully confident that that would happen just fine. And bless her heart, Patricia piled everything in. She didn't have a car. She piled it into a cab and took a little carrier, and but PCAP had given us their old address, so she got to the old address, and then she had to find out where the new address was, but she handed it in. That was October 7th, 2007. And then we waited until September 2011 to have our first MSci program. So that's, one of those little fun behind the scenes things that happen. I should say that coaching also had a particular advantage, that we were Adler was in 1997, we started looking at coaching programs, and we realized that there were about 6 programs that had been already in existence for 2 or 3 years. And so our coaches in Toronto had the experience of learning a number of different approaches. And so we were able to form a program that drew on a number of different perspectives in coaching. So and as most of you know, we were the first program in Canada to be accredited by the International Coach Federation. We are now working on updating that fabulous curriculum and maintaining all the parts that we have all found to be so helpful, and to add some new perspectives that come from based on the changes that are happening in the world today. So one thing I wanted to say, going back to the psychology folks, is we are unique. We don't fit into the little boxes of university graduate schools. We are a graduate school, we're fully accredited, but people who haven't heard from us, and we're very small, people who haven't heard of us will say, what, Alder? What's that? And just recognize that's going to happen. And we found, even back in the 1980s when I graduated, if you're looking for a practicum, you go and people say, the supervisor or the site directors will say, what is this? You're from Adler. Is that a real school? What is that? Some rinky-dink outfit? And there is in academia in general, there is a bit of a hierarchy. The longer you've been around and the bigger you are, and the more your faculty have published in peer-reviewed journals, the more people think that, you fit into the right categories. Well, we came in, we don't want to fit in that category. Of course, our students do research. Of course, many of them publish. But we want to teach people how to do the work. How do you do the work? How do you be a therapist? How do you be a coach? And so over the years, with the old MA program that came from Chicago, it took us a good 20 years before our students helped the practicum sites understand how well prepared we are. So we're in the middle of that kind of a transformation here with the new Master of Psychology program. So do not despair, have confidence. Believe me, when those agencies get a taste of how well prepared clinically our students are, there's not going to be any more looking down on Adler, but it's the kind of thing that is sort of one practicum site at a time. So anyway, I wanted to give you those tidbits and encouragements and explain to you things about Adler, the school, and Alfred Adler, our namesake, and the very humanistic philosopher and psychiatrist that we take a lot of our values from. So I'm open to any questions if there are some that would be useful for me to answer.